Host Jay. Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host Jason Bougger.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Write Good Books podcast. I'm Jason, and I'm joined again by our co-host Scott Michael Childers. You doing good?
I am doing good.
Doing good. We're embarking on our third year of the podcast. And
Holy cow.
Holy bananas, Batman.
Holy fudgesicles.
There you go. Hey, that's my book.
Plug Jason's book.
Yeah, and actually that's a good book to bring up for our topic this week, because as we're all back from the holidays and settled back into our normal routine, we're always reminded at the holidays you don't talk about religion or politics. So this time we're going to talk a little bit about religion in fiction. And since I've had some religious themes in some of my fiction, I thought we might as well bring some of that stuff up.
Yeah, let's.
It's a tricky subject because it's something a lot of people, you grow up with religion and you hold it dear to your heart. And a lot of times if people see their religion challenged or attacked, they'll take that personally. And, and as a somewhat religious person myself, it is sometimes hard to be a little objective about that, but we want this podcast to be objective, and we're not here to really criticize any religion. We're talking more about how to handle it in your writing, both real religions, if you're writing realistic earth-based fiction, or in fantasy worlds, if you're creating your own. I think in The Last Jedi, this was the first time they actually used the word religion to describe the Force. So. Well,
and also, there's also another side of people who, if a work is overtly religious, that turns them off as a reader. Mm-hmm. So we also have to balance that, too.
Yes, we do.
That, some people think that religion and fiction don't mix, mm-hmm. unless it comes from a specific publisher and is in specific bookstores.
Right.
So, during this whole episode, we are going to be walking a thin line, balancing things out in our discussion, and also the approaches mm-hmm. that you may want to take, depending on your target audience and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Especially with our first area, real-world religion.
Right. So in Holy Fudgesicles, there are some Catholic themes, but it's not a Catholic book. And pitching it, that was a problem for me, because I didn't... My initial pitch letter almost made it sound like it was a religious book, that it would belong on the religion shelf at Barnes & Noble, when it should not. It belongs on the, whatever subcategory a young adult would be in.
Well, and because there's, swearing and...
Right,
and
you can't
stuff.
go market it in churches either.
Yeah, that would...
So yeah, it's... Although that's not really, I guess, what I wanted to talk about in this podcast, but that's also... You don't want the religion to be a huge focus to where you're going to confuse your audience.
Yeah.
Am I reading a religious book, or am I reading a book that has some religious references?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Do you read a lot of fiction with religion in it?
Well, I don't go out and say, I'm going to read a religious book today.
Right.
I will read books, period. But for example, I read recently I read a book, a historical, I don't know how historical it is. It was a telling of Stonewall Jackson's life, mm-hmm. the Confederate general, but it was geared for Christian fiction bookshelves. So it was very overtly Christian,
okay.
Right? Very overtly religious, mm-hmm. but it was about a Civil War general, the Confederate Army. So it was a historical figure. So it was an interesting type of book to read, mm-hmm. And I knew going in it was written for that audience, so I wasn't surprised mm-hmm. by how much of it was in a religious tone. But if someone just handed me this thick book, say, hey, it's about Stonewall Jackson and the Civil War, wow, they might have been hit over the head.
Okay.
Right? And they may not have been the intended audience for that book. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting to see. Sort of like how you were talking about, it had a lot of in your book, a lot of Catholic themes, but it wasn't a Catholic book.
Right.
This one was
Yeah.
Christian fiction. That's how it was sold and marketed. So
Yeah. Well, it's like The Exorcist.
yeah,
You know,
there you
I
go.
mean, you can't have The Exorcist without the religious themes, but it's not a religious movie.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing. We'll try our best to make it clear where we're going with this.
I think so. When you're writing characters who have pre-existing religions,
Okay.
and it's going to be important to that character, and it may be important to your story, but I think what you really want to avoid is going over the top with the details. I'll have an example here. I have a short story I was working on about an atheist who sees ghosts and he's seeking counsel from a priest, from a Catholic priest. And my first draft, I just, I may have been quoting pages from the Catholic Catechism on the, I really went into detail, and on the second draft I see that, none of that detail was relevant to the actual situation, and all I would have done keeping that there would have been bore readers. Be like, well, who cares about whatever,
Well, and you would have lost the goal of the story, right?
Right.
You would have been so caught in...
yeah, I was more educating about a certain belief system instead of the interaction between the characters. Yeah. And so I don't know. I think in my novel I keep that stuff out.
Yeah.
More.
Well, I think it has to be... Like, you don't tell the reader every meal a character has had.
Yeah.
You don't tell a reader how many how many times they breathed in that past hour, unless you have to show stress or emotional response, right? There are certain parts of your characters' lives that you dig into because it's relevant to the greater story, the greater tale. And then there's other parts that inform how you write them and how they interact with the world, but aren't actually put on the page.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm trying to get at with this. Religion could be a big part of a character's life, definitely. But
a small part of the story.
yeah. And depending on what you're writing, I know people that in their everyday correspondence, they quote Bible verses.
See, that's too much.
But that is real life.
Yeah.
That is an actual person I know and I get
Yeah.
letters and emails from,
Yeah.
and they are quoting Scripture. It's that important to them.
Yeah.
But it is true to who they are. But when I'm talking with them face to face, not everything is a psalm, right? Not everything comes from the gospel. So it is one of those crazy things where if your character in a tale kept saying, "I hate oyster stew," every page, that's too much.
Yeah.
And what does it add? So.
You're right. It's a backstory that may or may not be relevant.
Right. And you may bring out parts of it during a conversation or during a pivotal scene or when they make a decision and they get asked, "Why did you make that decision?" They say, "Well, because I believe X and Y and Z." It adds a layer of truth, of a real life type of situation. But that's a tool you don't want to overuse.
You could have a character. I'm trying to think, make sure I say the right thing here. You could have a character observe a Ramadan fast without explaining it to your reader, or without having the character explain why he's doing that. Really.
Yeah, I mean, unless part of another character's growth is to learn about the world.
Oh, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
But that
It's
is
always where it's relevant to your story.
Yeah, and those are decisions that you have made. This character's path is this. This character's path is learning about the world. This character's path is teaching about, this thing or that.
Right.
Here is another thing. I've seen characters that religion is used to create annoyance.
Oh.
Right? The purpose of that character is for other people to be annoyed with them. And so they take things over the top.
Okay.
Right? And it is clearly over the top behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Not what a traditional follower would be.
Sure.
So
Yeah, you can toy with it. So yeah, I mean it's a great character building tool.
yeah. You have to be careful though. that there's an offsetting example of, okay, if this character is using religion to be annoying, you have some sort of offset that says, no, it's just that character.
Right.
This isn't the real world view in this story about everything.
Yeah, and see, and that's where you run into the problem. You don't want to stereotype any belief system, or you're going to make people not want to read your books. And, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I'm kind of under the frame of mind, why offend people if you don't need to?
Yeah. And that's the thing, if you don't need to.
Yeah.
There are plenty of works out there where people are writing to make a point, and that's not what we're covering today.
Right, we're talking about it just kind of as a part of setting or character dimension.
Yeah. And that's just in the character. I mean, you can use religion as a source of conflict amongst characters. You can use that as a setting by showing certain religious rites or holidays or festivals. You show a sense of where the person may be in the world or when in the world. So, if you're doing a story about Salem back in the colonial days, if you don't have a witch burning,
well, yeah.
I'm just kidding. But it sets the scene.
Right. Yeah, I used religion as part of the setting on a short story I had about two dying vampires sitting on the walls outside of Vatican City, and that was purely for setting. It wasn't for any. I just told a fun little story. Okay, it was about zombies.
Okay, so two dying vampires sitting on the walls of the holy city.
They're watching their food supply dwindle as the rest of the population is infected with the zombie virus, so they're just sitting on there waiting for the sun to come up. It was a love story.
Okay, well that blends supernatural with religion, which is
which is actually important.
Because supernatural usually leads to some sort of religious belief.
Yeah.
Not always up front, but if there are things past our understanding of the laws of nature, well, who knows how far that goes.
Yeah, humans tend to look for a religious answer to supernatural occurrences.
Well, some do and some don't.
Yeah.
And there's sources of conflict for you.
And that is something else I wanted to touch on. There's also the non-religious.
Yes.
And when it comes to stereotyping, I think in a lot of, I don't know, maybe not so much now, but I feel like the non-believer is often the scapegoat, or can be, and I'm not sure where I'm going with that.
It depends on the points of view that you're bringing in. Yeah, there are some people that will take an atheist and therefore, because they don't believe in something, that means they don't believe in anything, right? And they become the fall guy or something.
Yeah.
And that is something too. If you're going to have religion in your book and you're writing atheism, well, that also needs to be treated realistically, right? Again, assuming your target audience is mass market, right?
Yeah, the general audience.
So
atheists don't in real life run around shopping malls tearing down Christmas trees like the media may portray them to be. I don't like seeing stereotypes, I guess, is my biggest thing with any belief system. So, I don't know, it's complicated, it's hard. Do it with kitty gloves on unless that's not your reason for writing.
Well, and it's one of those things that when you introduce that is a doorway for critique.
Yeah.
Right? And that you're going to become a target, because there are some folks out there that no matter how carefully you tread, it will be wrong. And we might discuss critiques later on. But we started this episode with that personal, right? That personal connection.
Yeah.
And so now here's someone talking about something that many people hold dear, and if you don't do it right, it's going to be a personal attack. Felt that with that type of emotional response.
Yeah.
And again, some of you might be writing to elicit that.
Right.
You might be writing to elicit shock or to rattle some cages.
Right, which is perfectly fine.
That's your decision.
As long as you're upfront about it.
Well, or if you're, we know there's authors out there that love to rattle cages, and the more controversy, the better, because that gets their name out.
Yeah.
If that's your approach, that's your approach. I'm not going to tell you can't.
Right.
But if you haven't decided that that's going to be your approach, if you haven't decided that you're going to take on the world, use kid gloves.
Yeah.
Treat it carefully. Treat it with respect. Get some opinions of what you have written, not what you are going to write, but as you have written it, because what you intend and what shows up in that first draft may not be the same thing.
Right, and you don't want to wake up one day and find out you were banned for life from Twitter by making a mistake.
Yeah.
On that note, I think we'll call this one good, and next time we'll make this a two-parter, and next time we'll talk about creating religion, which is a lot easier to talk about, but maybe a lot harder to do. I guess using fictional religions in your fictional setting. So until next time, if you'd like to support us, check out our Patreon site at patreon.com/writegoodbooks and check us out on the web. We'd love to hear from you at writegoodbooks.com/podcast. See ya.
See ya.